Now, last night we talked about the fact that there had been some prominent voices inside MAGA, inside the Republican Party, that had been for months urging Trump to avoid a war with Iran, not to get sucked in by Israel, to resolve this diplomatically. And one of those people has been Tucker Carlson, arguably the person who has done more to try and avert a war with Iran than any single other person. In fact, going back to 2020, when Trump killed or ordered assassinated Iran's top general, Soleimani, Tucker Carlson was vehemently opposed to that, denounced it before it was done, argued against it before it was done, denounced it after. He thought and worked hard to have J.D. Vance picked as Trump's vice president because he thought that Trump would be there, or Vance would be there, as kind of a restraint against these neocon warmongering voices like Marco Rubio that were going to be in the administration. And he's been arguing privately and publicly for a long time that Trump will destroy his presidency and the MAGA movement if he drags the United States into a new war. So unprovoked, because Tucker Carlson was with Steve Bannon yesterday, Tucker Carlson went on Steve Bannon's podcast, Steve Bannon then went on Tucker's, where they talked about the huge mistake of getting involved in this war, and it was still done from the perspective of not having been done yet. They weren't really criticizing Trump. They were kind of trying to urge Trump not to let Netanyahu suck him into this war. And Tucker Carlson was doing it from a place of praise for Trump, saying, I've known Trump for a long time. I really believe he views war as a horrific human event, that he has a genuine desire to avoid it. When he talks about peace, it's very genuine. They both agreed on that. And then Tucker Carlson was saying, if you let the neocons and the Israelis permit you to have the United States be dragged into the war they've always wanted the U.S. to fight for Israel, you're going to destroy your presidency. You're going to split the MAGA movement. And he was doing it from this place of like, I want to be a voice that encourages you to think about what's good for the country. And knowing that I'm appealing to what I truly believe is your good side. And this is what Trump had to say in response. He posted this. Trump did very shortly after we finished our program last night. As soon as we were done, one of my colleagues alerted me to it. This is what he posted. Quote, somebody please explain to kooky Tucker Carlson that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Now, you note here, everything Trump is saying, this is the part that I find most dangerous. This is the part that I believe is Trump actually believing what he's saying, is that he has reduced it in his mind to a very simplistic formulation. One that he keeps repeating is simple, which is either Iran gets a nuclear weapon or you go to war and prevent them from having one. And since Iran having a nuclear weapon is unacceptable, only a war to prevent them from having one, or an agreement where they agree to give up their entire nuclear program, including energy, are the only two options. He keeps saying it's very simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. But the question of whether Iran was actually trying to get a nuclear weapon, whether they were negotiating to allow whatever safeguards were necessary to ensure that they didn't, that has all been swept to the side. It's now taken as a given in Trump's mind, and therefore in the mind of a lot of his supporters and the minds of a lot of the media narrative as well, that Iran was trying to get a nuclear weapon. And so the only way to debate this war is, are you in favor of allowing Iran to get a nuclear weapon, or do you want to go to war with them and destroy the country? And that's all there is in Trump's mind, are those two questions. But attacking Tucker Carlson that way, unprovoked, I think is an attempt by Trump to signal to podcasters or activists or MAGA influencers or Republican politicians that no dissent is permitted, especially when it comes to something very important to Trump, which suddenly clearly has become destroying Iran, or the war, or regime change in Iran, or the war in Iran. And then anybody who speaks up and challenges Trump or questions Trump, he will expel them from the MAGA world, from Trump world. He'll revoke their MAGA card. And a lot of influencers and pundits and the like are seeing that, people whose careers and profit depends upon access to the White House, access to Trump. He purposely chose the most popular and influential one, Trump did, Tucker Carlson, to say, look, if I can do this, Tucker Carlson, for even mild questioning of my war, any of you will just be instantly banished from the kingdom. It's just punishment for dissent is what that obviously is. Now, J.D. Vance, knowing that that's not a very substantive or sophisticated case that Trump is making, went to Twitter today to try and defend Trump. No hesitation at all, no questioning at all about whether this is the right war. Suddenly, J.D. Vance is a voluntarily public advocate and cheerleader for this war, this unprovoked war that Israel is fighting against its enemy and now dragging the United States into. And here's what he had to say on Twitter, quote, Look, I'm seeing this from the inside. I'm admittedly biased toward our president and my friend. But there's a lot of crazy stuff on social media, so I wanted to address some things directly on the Iran issue. First, the president has been amazingly consistent over 10 years that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Over the last few months, he encouraged his foreign policy team to reach a deal with the Iranians to accomplish this goal. The president has made clear that Iran cannot have uranium enrichment. And he said repeatedly that this would happen one of two ways, the easy way or, quote, the other way. Now, the idea that going to war the minute the Israelis want one with Iran, trying to change their regime or destroy all their nuclear facilities, ordering 10, 15 million people to evacuate Tehran as President Trump ordered them to do last night at 2 in the morning, their time, that's somehow consistent with everything he's been saying for the last 10 years is obviously preposterous. That's why so many people who are prominent followers of his and supporters of his are feeling very confused because he led them to believe the exact opposite. There was no suggestion from Trump over the last 10 years that he's going to go to war with Israel against Iran if they don't reach a deal on the exact day that Trump sets as the deadline. And again, you see J.D. Vance there kind of just sliding over the fact of whether Iran was actually trying to get a nuclear weapon in the first place. Yes, Trump has always said Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Everybody said that. Obama said that, Biden said that, Hillary Clinton says that, George Bush said, everyone has said that. But none of them ever went to war with Iran because they didn't believe Iran was seeking a nuclear weapon. That was the consensus of our intelligence agency that they weren't. And then Obama created a framework that everybody agrees monitored the Iranians to make sure they weren't trying to obtain a nuclear weapon. And so here's J.D. Vance just trying to say he's been consistent on this for 10 years as though this war with Iran that he's now assuming as his own somehow is what you should have expected based on everything that he said over the last decade. Does anyone actually believe that? Vance goes on, quote, second, I've seen a lot of confusion over the issue of, quote, civilian nuclear power and, quote, uranium enrichment. These are distinct issues. Right, the confusion is coming from Trump and from the U.S. government. Iran could have civilian nuclear power without enrichment, but Iran rejected that. Okay, this statement is false. You cannot have nuclear power, civilian nuclear power, without uranium enrichment. Uranium enrichment is a prerequisite to having civilian nuclear energy. What J.D. Vance means here is that Iran could have a nuclear program, but they wouldn't be enriching the uranium themselves. It would be enriched in Saudi Arabia or the UAE or in some other place in the region, and then it would be given to Iran when they needed it. So they weren't enriching the uranium themselves as a way to guarantee that it never went above a certain percent. And they would dismantle all their own facilities. Why would Iran ever agree to be dependent upon some other country to provide them with what they're entitled to have? They're going to be dependent on Saudi Arabia to give them the enriched uranium in order to keep their nuclear energy plants going. They had a deal with the United States with Obama, and 3 years later, President Trump withdrew from it and nullified it. Why would they trust the United States or some other country to enrich uranium for them? The deal was always supposed to be that they were going to have their own enriched uranium, but have safeguards in place to make sure they didn't get a nuclear weapon, and nothing should have changed in that regard, other than the fact that Trump started speaking to a bunch of neocons, spending his days talking to Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton and especially Benjamin Netanyahu, all the same liars who have lied the U.S. into war repeatedly. And they were the ones who persuaded him that enrichment means Iran has a nuclear weapons program, and that's something he said that they can't have. And since Iran at the negotiating table isn't willing to give that up, that means Iran is no longer willing to do a deal, and that's what convinced Trump war was inevitable. Vance goes on, quote, meanwhile, Iran has enriched uranium far above the level necessary for any civilian purpose. They've been found in violation of their non-proliferation obligations by the IAEA, which is hardly a right-wing organization. It's one thing to want civilian nuclear energy. It's another thing to demand sophisticated enrichment capacity. And it's still another to cling to enrichment while simultaneously violating basic non-proliferation obligations and enriching right to the point of weapons-grade uranium. I have yet to see a single good argument for why Iran needed to enrich uranium well above the threshold for civilian use. I have yet to see a single good argument for why Iran was justified in violating its non-proliferation obligations. I have yet to see a single good pushback against the IAEA's findings. If you look at the IAEA report, by the way, it specifically says there's no evidence that Iran has reactivated the nuclear program, that it suspended in 2003, exactly what Tulsi Gabbard said. But the reason Iran was enriching uranium above the percentage originally required by the Iran deal is precisely because Trump withdrew from the Iran deal. But there was still no evidence that the entire war is now predicated on that they were seeking a nuclear weapon. Exactly like there was no evidence for what the Iraq War was predicated on, that Saddam Hussein was seeking nuclear weapons and had weapons of mass destruction. Vance goes on, quote, meanwhile, the president has shown remarkable restraint in keeping our military's focus on protecting our troops and protecting our citizens. He may decide he needs to take further action to end uranium enrichment. That decision ultimately belongs to the president. And of course, people are right to be worried about foreign entanglement after the last 25 years of idiotic foreign policy. First of all, the decision does not belong to the president. If you read the Constitution, which I presume J.D. Vance has done, he graduated from Yale Law School, Article 1 reserves the war-making power not to the presidency, but to the Congress. He'd have to go to the Congress and get approval for that war. I know that's very quaint. I know presidents don't do that anymore, but that is actually how the republic was constructed. That decision to fight a war with Iran or attack Iran does not belong to the president. He goes on, but I believe the president has earned some trust on this issue. And having seen this up close and personal, I can assure you that he is only interested in using the American military to accomplish the American people's goals. Whatever he does, that is his focus. I found that exceptionally unpersuasive. You can decide for yourself how you feel about it. But again, J.D. Vance is acknowledging, and the reason he put out a statement is because Trump is very close to involving the United States militarily in this war. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.